HOA president cut my lock with bolt cutters and stole my Jeep from my own driveway while I was working undercover to bust a meth ring. I came home exhausted, ready to collapse, and found my driveway empty with fresh metal shavings glinting where my security chain used to be. Brenda Whitmore thought she was eliminating another problem neighbor who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. What this woman didn't know was that she'd just stolen $80,000 worth of federal surveillance equipment from a regional drug task force detective. Those bolt cutters didn't just cut through steel. They triggered a federal investigation that would destroy her entire corruption network. Where are you watching this from, by the way? Drop a comment below because you're about to witness the most satisfying federal takedown of an HOA tyrant who thought petty authority made her untouchable. My name's Marcus Donovan, Mac to everyone who matters, and I'm a detective with the Regional Drug Task Force. At 38, recently divorced, I just bought this modest ranch house in Willowbrook Estates to start fresh. The Jeep Wrangler in my driveway wasn't just transportation, it was my lifeline. Lifted suspension, custom modifications, reinforced frame, perfect for 3 weeks of surveillance work in meth territory, and my symbol of freedom after losing everything in the divorce. Willowbrook Estates seemed perfect. Middle-class subdivision, mix of retirees and young families, decent property values. What nobody mentioned was Brenda Whitmore, 62 years old, retired DMV supervisor who lives in the biggest house at the end of Maple Lane and runs our HOA like her personal kingdom. Picture every nightmare bureaucrat you've ever dealt with, then give her a measuring tape and delusions of absolute power. 2 months after moving in, I came home from a normal shift to find a violation notice taped to my door. Non-conforming vehicle display violates community aesthetic standards. No specific rule cited, just Brenda's royal decree that my Jeep somehow offended her delicate sensibilities. The next HOA meeting reeked of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant in that cramped community center. Fluorescent lights humming overhead while Brenda held court from behind a folding table. Her suffocating perfume couldn't mask the staleness of the room or her attitude. I stood up politely, asked for clarification on which specific rule my vehicle violated. "We maintain property values here, Mr. Donovan," she snapped, banging her little wooden gavel like a petty dictator. "We don't accommodate everyone's hobbies." Hobbies? This woman had no idea what that Jeep really was, but she was about to find out the hard way. Driving home slowly, I really paid attention for the first time. 3 houses down, boat parked in driveway bigger than my Jeep. Across the street, contractor's work trailer, been there for months. Next block, RV taking up half the front yard. None of them had violation notices, just me, the new guy who worked odd hours and drove something different. That's when I realized this wasn't about property values. This was about control, and I was the target who had the audacity not to immediately submit. 20 years of police work teaches you to spot patterns, and selective enforcement is just discrimination with a legal veneer. The question wasn't whether Brenda was targeting me, it was why, and what she was really after. My tight finances from the divorce meant I couldn't afford legal battles or moving costs, but here's the thing about being a cop. You learn patience, you document everything, and you never let the bad guys know you're building a case until it's too late for them to run. So I smiled, nodded politely at the next meeting, and started taking notes. The taste of that bitter community center coffee lingered as I walked to my car, but it was nothing compared to the bitter lesson Brenda was about to receive. Because if she wanted to play games with the wrong guy, she was about to learn that some hobbies are more dangerous than others. And my particular hobby involved federal jurisdiction and very serious consequences for people who thought they were above the law. 3 weeks later, I returned from the most dangerous undercover operation of my career to find my driveway empty. The tow truck tracks in my gravel told the story, along with those fresh bolt cutter marks glinting in the morning sun. Mrs. Rodriguez filled in the details from behind her fence, voice trembling. Brenda came at 6 a.m. with bolt cutters and a tow truck, said it was an abandoned vehicle emergency. The impound lot sat on the wrong side of town, surrounded by chain link and razor wire. The attendant handed me a bill that made my jaw clench, $300 daily storage plus $150 for towing. "Been here 3 days, he mumbled. "Lady said it was abandoned, gave us the authority paperwork." Nearly $1,000 I couldn't afford, but I paid it and documented everything. Receipt timestamps, photos, copies of Brenda's emergency authority paperwork. That's when I noticed the tow company name, B&R Recovery Services. Years of following money trails in drug cases had taught me to check business licenses, and sure enough, the B stood for Bradley Whitmore, Brenda's brother-in-law. The metallic taste of disgust filled my mouth as the corruption pattern became clear. Back home, I spread the HOA bylaws across my kitchen table. My academy training included a semester on civil law, and one lesson stuck with me. Organizations that write their own rules have to follow them, especially when wielding emergency powers. After 2 hours of legal reading, I found Brenda's fatal mistake. Emergency vehicle removal required 30 days written notice. She'd towed my Jeep after only 15 days, violating her own procedures. The next morning brought my counterattack. Filed a formal complaint with the county about illegal towing, submitted public records requests for all HOA emergency actions over 2 years, and installed a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. If Brenda wanted war, she'd get it, but on my terms, with my rules. The public records painted an ugly picture. 37 emergency actions targeting single mothers, minorities, blue-collar workers, anyone who didn't fit Brenda's suburban fantasy. Every towing contract went to B&R Recovery. Every landscaping emergency went to Whitmore & Sons Contracting, a family business built on extortion and selective enforcement, dressed up as community standards. That evening, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door, 80-year-old widow clutching a manila folder like it contained nuclear codes. "Mr. Mack, can we talk inside?" Her story made my blood pressure spike. Violation notice for her rose garden, the memorial she'd maintained for her late husband for 15 years. Suddenly, non-conforming, because the roses were the wrong shade of red. The approved replacement flowers cost $800 from a specific nursery. Guess who owned it? Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. Parents pushing strollers would pause at my driveway, sharing stories in hushed tones. The young dad threatened with daily fines unless he parked his work truck 3 blocks away. The teacher cited for her children's chalk art. The veteran forced to remove his American flag because the pole was 2 inches over regulation height. Each story added another charge to my growing case file. But Brenda had made a crucial error. She thought she was harassing another helpless homeowner who'd bend the knee rather than fight. Instead, she'd picked a fight with someone who knew exactly how to build a federal case, someone with resources and training she couldn't imagine. My undercover work had taught me patience. Let the target make mistakes while you gather evidence. The security cameras caught everything now, her daily inspection walks, photographing every inch of my property like she was conducting surveillance. The irony was delicious. She thought she was the predator, but she'd just walked into a trap that would destroy everything she'd built. Every photo she took, every violation notice she filed, every selective enforcement decision was being documented with the precision of a federal investigation, because that's exactly what this was becoming. She'd stolen property from a federal law enforcement officer, violated civil rights through discriminatory enforcement, and operated a corruption network using HOA authority as cover. 3 federal crimes I could prove, with a paper trail she'd created herself. The greasy smell of the impound lot still clung to my clothes as I reviewed the evidence that night, but it was nothing compared to the satisfaction building in my chest. Brenda thought she was playing neighborhood politics. I was building a RICO case. Brenda escalated 3 days later with a move so bold it took my breath away. I was rebuilding my motorcycle engine in the garage when 2 patrol cars pulled into my driveway, red and blue lights cutting through the afternoon heat. Officers Martinez and Thompson stepped out, looking confused and slightly embarrassed as the smell of motor oil and metal shavings filled the air. "Detective Donovan, we got a welfare check call about suspicious activity at this address. Caller claimed you were displaying erratic behavior and might be dangerous to the community." The awkward silence stretched until Martinez cleared his throat. "Sir, we recognize you from the task force briefings. This is highly unusual." Thompson was already shaking his head, muttering about paperwork. "False police reports carry criminal charges, Detective. You documenting this?" Through my security feed, I watched Brenda's silhouette in her window across the street, probably congratulating herself on her brilliant move. She'd just committed a felony and handed me evidence on a silver platter. But that wasn't even her biggest mistake of the week. The certified letter arrived that afternoon, reeking of her signature perfume like she'd bathed the envelope in it. "Final notice regarding non-conforming activities. Compliance required within 48 hours or face escalated enforcement procedures. $50 daily fines, effective immediately. No specific violations listed, just bureaucratic threats designed to intimidate." The paper felt expensive between my fingers, probably paid for with stolen HOA funds. Then came the whisper campaign. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned it first, wringing her hands nervously. She's been telling people you threatened her at the meeting, that your odd hours prove you're involved in criminal activity. The lies spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Claims I was unstable, dangerous, that my suspicious behavior endangered children. Classic isolation tactics. Turn the community against the target before they can organize resistance. My counterattack came from 20 years of following drug money through shell companies and fake businesses. If Brenda was running a corruption network, the financial records would tell the story. Public documents revealed HOA budget discrepancies stretching back 3 years, maintenance contracts inflated by 30%, emergency repairs that never happened, special assessments that disappeared into family businesses. But the smoking gun was buried in quarterly reports. Community Enhancement Consulting, $40,000 to BW Associates. A quick business license search revealed BW Associates was Brenda herself, billing the HOA for services she was supposed to provide as an unpaid volunteer. She wasn't just stealing my Jeep, she was embezzling from every homeowner in the development. The secret garage meeting felt like planning a drug bust, except our target was a suburban dictator in designer golf clothes. 12 families gathered among my tools and motorcycle parts, sharing stories that made my detective instincts sing. Frank Patterson, 70-year-old Marine veteran, brought his violation notice with trembling hands. "She fined me for displaying this flag," he said, pointing to the stars and stripes the Corps had given him at his son's funeral. Said it created visual clutter. Sarah Mitchell clutched her coffee cup like a lifeline, explaining how Brenda threatened liens for parking her cleaning company van overnight. "I work 2 jobs to keep my kids housed," she whispered. "Can't afford separate parking, but she says commercial vehicles violate residential standards." The van was clearly marked with cleaning supplies visible through the windows, an easy target for selective enforcement. Each story followed the same pattern: vague violations, impossible compliance standards, financial penalties benefiting Brenda's network. But what made my cop radar scream was the demographics. Every target was minority, single parent, blue collar, or elderly. Textbook civil rights violations hiding behind HOA authority. I handed out composition notebooks like evidence kits. Document everything: dates, times, witnesses, exact quotes. Courts love details, and we're building a federal case here. From my undercover training, I knew that multiple witnesses telling consistent stories could destroy any defense. We weren't just fighting back. We were building a conspiracy charge that would put Brenda in federal prison. The psychological pressure was working exactly as Brenda intended. Mrs. Chen avoided eye contact, clearly terrified by escalating threats. Frank looked exhausted, the flag controversy wearing on his dignity. Sarah was considering selling rather than fighting, exactly what Brenda wanted. Fear was her weapon, and she wielded it expertly. But she'd made one critical error. Instead of picking off isolated homeowners one by one, she'd created a group of victims with a federal law enforcement officer organizing their resistance. Every intimidation tactic, every false report, every selective enforcement decision was being documented with the precision of a criminal investigation. The taste of stale garage air mixed with determination as I reviewed our evidence that night. Brenda thought she was crushing another helpless resident. Instead, she'd just declared war on someone who knew exactly how to fight back and win. Brenda's next move was so reckless it made me question her sanity. I spotted the private investigator on day 1, pudgy guy in a Honda Civic parked across from my house, chain smoking and taking photos with a telephoto lens. 20 years of surveillance work teaches you to recognize amateur hour when you see it. The cigarette smoke drifting from his cracked window, fast food wrappers multiplying on his dashboard, and the way he ducked like a scared turtle every time I glanced his direction. Running his plates revealed Jeremy Hoskins, private investigator with a suspended license and 2 pending fraud charges. Brenda had scraped the bottom of the barrel, probably the only PI desperate enough to take her dirty money. But her real mistake came 3 days later when she called my boss. Captain Rodriguez summoned me to his office, holding a complaint letter that reeked of Brenda's perfume even through the envelope. "Mac, got an interesting call from a concerned citizen claiming you're running criminal operations from your residence. This Homeowners Association president thinks you're a threat to community safety." His expression was pure amusement mixed with disbelief. I explained the harassment campaign, the illegal towing, the embezzlement evidence. Rodriguez listened, occasionally shaking his head. So this woman hired a PI to investigate the detective who's investigating her corruption? That's either brilliant or suicidal. Then his expression shifted, and I knew something big was coming. Mac, you realize your undercover vehicle carries federal asset protection, right? The world tilted. Federal asset protection meant my Jeep wasn't just personal property, it was government equipment with special legal status. Stealing federal law enforcement assets carried mandatory 10-year sentences. Brenda hadn't committed simple theft. She'd violated federal statutes that would put her in prison until she was eligible for Medicare. But Rodriguez wasn't finished dropping bombs. Your current assignment monitoring municipal corruption? That includes city contracts with local HOAs. This Whitmore woman just inserted herself into a federal investigation. The pieces clicked together like a perfect arrest. My undercover work was already targeting the same corruption network Brenda had built using city oversight contracts. That afternoon brought the ultimate display of Brenda's desperation. Through my security cameras, I watched her return to my driveway with bolt cutters, attacking the reinforced chain securing my Jeep like a woman possessed. The metallic screech of cutting steel echoed through the neighborhood while sweat stained her designer golf shirt. She was destroying federal property on high-definition video, creating evidence that would convict her in any courtroom in America. When I returned from a stakeout 48 hours later, my driveway was empty again. But this time was different. Federal GPS tracking meant every movement was monitored by the U.S. Marshals Service. Brenda had towed government surveillance equipment across county lines, adding interstate transportation of stolen federal property to her growing felony list. The woman had built her own federal case with the precision of a prosecutor's wet dream. The recovery operation was beautiful. U.S. Marshals served the impound lot with federal seizure notices, explaining they'd been harboring stolen government assets. The lot owner went pale when he realized his business license was now at risk. "She never said it was federal equipment," he stammered, practically throwing my keys at the deputies while his hands shook like autumn leaves. That evening, Brenda organized an emergency HOA meeting to address the security threat in our community. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as she displayed doctored photos of my garage, claiming the equipment inside proved I was running criminal operations. What made it hilarious was that her evidence showed federal surveillance gear, legally obtained and properly documented for my undercover assignments. Frank Patterson stood up during her presentation, his 70-year-old Marine voice cutting through her hysteria. "Ma'am, this man's never threatened anyone. You're the one cutting chains and stealing vehicles in broad daylight." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Sarah Mitchell found her courage too. "My kids feel safer with Detective Donovan here than they ever did with your security theater." Brenda's support collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Neighbors who'd been intimidated into silence for years finally saw her for what she really was, a petty tyrant drunk on imaginary power. Her increasingly frantic gestures and shrill voice only made her look more unhinged. The perfume cloud surrounding her couldn't mask the stench of desperation. But the real show was happening behind the scenes. Federal agents were documenting every aspect of her corruption network, building a RICO case that would dismantle her entire operation. Brenda thought she was fighting a neighborhood dispute. She was actually starring in her own federal prosecution, complete with high-definition evidence and multiple federal felonies. The taste of stale community center coffee had never been so sweet. Captain Rodriguez's call came at midnight, his voice tight with barely controlled excitement. "Mac, get down here now. Bring everything you've documented on the Whitmore situation. Everything." The urgency in his tone made my detective instincts sing. Something big was breaking. The task force conference room buzzed with energy despite the late hour. Federal agent Sarah Chen sat at the head table, surrounded by surveillance photos, financial records, and evidence boxes that made my case files look like a kindergarten project. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with the metallic scent of stress sweat as she looked up from a photograph that made my blood freeze. It was Brenda, shaking hands with City Councilman Robert Hayes outside Romano's, the same restaurant where we'd conducted a drug money surveillance operation 6 months ago. "Detective Donovan," Agent Chen said, sliding the photo across the table, "meet the center of a $2 million municipal corruption network." My mouth went dry as puzzle pieces slammed together with sickening clarity. "Your neighborhood HOA harassment? It was never about property values," she continued, spreading bank records across the table like playing cards. "Mrs. Whitmore's been using HOA fines and special assessments to launder kickback money from city contracts. Every violation notice generates revenue that gets cycled through her family's shell companies." Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression mixing amazement with dark satisfaction. Mac, when she stole your Jeep, she didn't just commit theft. She stole $80,000 worth of federal surveillance equipment and interfered with an active corruption investigation. The GPS tracker led us to 3 more impound lots involved in the money laundering scheme. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Agent Chen opened another file, revealing surveillance photos that made my pulse race. Brenda meeting with contractors, exchanging envelopes, coordinating illegal contract awards, all captured through enhanced surveillance equipment the feds had installed around my house after the first theft report. "We've been monitoring this network for 8 months, Chen explained, her voice carrying the weight of a major breakthrough. But we needed someone inside the community to document the HOA's role in the operation. Your harassment complaint gave us probable cause for enhanced surveillance of the entire neighborhood." The irony hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Every violation notice I'd received, every intimidation tactic Brenda had used, every neighbor's story I'd documented was federal evidence in a RICO case. She'd been trying to eliminate a federal law enforcement officer who'd accidentally positioned himself in the middle of her criminal enterprise. "Your personal fight with the HOA queen just became the centerpiece of a federal prosecution," Rodriguez said, unable to suppress his grin. "Every time she harassed you, she was harassing a federal agent. Every time she stole your property, she was stealing government assets. Every threat, every violation, every selective enforcement action, it's all felony obstruction of justice." Chen's expression was pure professional satisfaction mixed with predatory focus. The beautiful part? She documented everything herself: violation notices, meeting minutes, financial records. She built our case with the precision of a federal prosecutor. We have her on RICO charges, conspiracy, money laundering, theft of federal property, and obstruction of justice. The weight of revelation settled over me like bulletproof armor. My divorce, my move to Willowbrook Estates, even Brenda's targeting of my Jeep, it had all led to this moment. She thought she was crushing another helpless homeowner to protect her little kingdom. Instead, she'd been building a federal case against herself, one perfectly documented crime at a time. The taste of justice was sweeter than victory, and we were just getting started. The federal task force conference room smelled like burnt coffee and justice when Agent Chen spread the evidence across 3 tables like a general planning D-Day. Wall-mounted whiteboards connected Brenda's corruption network to city officials with red string that looked like a serial killer's obsession board. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, uncapping a dry erase marker with theatrical flair, "we're about to dismantle the most beautifully documented suburban crime syndicate in federal history." Captain Rodriguez couldn't stop grinning as he pointed to surveillance photos showing my neighborhood transformed into an evidence-gathering paradise. Mac's house is now federal command central. Every camera, every recording device, every piece of Brenda's harassment becomes prosecutorial gold. The irony was delicious. She'd been terrorizing a federal crime scene for months, creating her own conviction with every violation notice. Forensic accountant Mike Torres used coffee cups to demonstrate Brenda's money laundering scheme on my kitchen table, moving them like chess pieces through an elaborate shell game. HOA fine goes here, gets transferred to fake contractor there, pays consulting fee to city official over here, who awards municipal contract back to the original shell company. Watching dirty money dance through a dozen corporate layers, I realized that complexity creates evidence. Every transaction leaves digital fingerprints that can't be erased. The evening community watch meetings in my garage had evolved into witness preparation sessions that would make any prosecutor salivate. Frank Patterson arrived with his flag violation timeline documented like military intelligence. Sarah Mitchell brought photographs of every interaction with Brenda's enforcement team. Mrs. Chen clutched a folder of Rose Garden citations showing systematic racial targeting that would make civil rights attorneys weep with joy. Think like detectives, I coached them, distributing composition notebooks that felt like weapons in their hands. Courts love timelines, and multiple witnesses telling the same story destroys any defense. My undercover training had taught me that ordinary citizens make extraordinary witnesses when they understand the stakes and their power. Agent Chen revealed the federal resources now focused on our suburban battlefield, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. IRS criminal investigation is auditing every business. FBI financial crimes is tracing money transfers. The U.S. Attorney's Office is preparing RICO indictments that'll send people to federal prison for decades. She paused, letting the magnitude sink into the stale garage air. Your neighborhood harassment just became a federal priority. But the real preparation was psychological. Victims' rights attorney Patricia Hayes explained what happens when federal cases explode into public view. Media attention, court appearances, possible retaliation before trial, she warned, her voice gentle but firm. Everyone needs to understand that your harassment stories will become national news. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decision. Fight back publicly or remain victims privately. Technical preparation transformed my house into something between a federal evidence vault and a NASA mission control center. Agents installed surveillance equipment that could capture whispered conversations 3 houses away, encrypted communication networks that bypassed local servers, and recording systems that transmitted evidence directly to federal databases in real time. The basement hummed with electronic equipment that cost more than most people's cars. Dr. Hayes returned for community empowerment sessions that opened eyes like sunrise after a long night. Selective enforcement based on race, age, family status, or economic background isn't just harassment. It's federal civil rights violations with mandatory prison sentences. The room buzzed with understanding as neighbors realized their personal hell was systematic discrimination that violated laws most people didn't know existed. The coordination timeline required military precision that made my drug bust experience look simple. Federal arrests at dawn, Chen outlined, pointing to a schedule posted like battle orders. State charges filed simultaneously to prevent jurisdiction shopping. Media briefings at noon to control narrative. Asset seizure teams hit bank accounts before anyone can transfer money. She studied our faces with predatory satisfaction. This operation dismantles the entire network in 18 hours. Frank Patterson raised his weathered hand, voice carrying marine authority that silenced the room. Ma'am, after what this woman put us through, watching her get arrested will be better than Christmas morning. The nervous laughter that followed carried months of suppressed anger finally finding direction and purpose. Sarah Mitchell clutched her notebook like a lifeline, tears in her eyes as she realized her work van harassment would help convict federal criminals. My kids will see that fighting back actually works, she whispered, voice breaking with emotion that made everyone's eyes water. The taste of anticipation filled my mouth like electricity as I reviewed our battle plan that night, surrounded by evidence boxes and federal equipment that hummed with potential energy. Months of harassment, theft, and intimidation were about to be answered with the full weight of federal justice. Brenda thought she was crushing another helpless homeowner. Instead, she'd declared war on the United States government, and the government was about to teach her how that story always ends. Brenda's panic hit full meltdown when Jeremy Hoskins, her pathetic private investigator, got arrested trying to access my bank records with a fake federal subpoena. Watching him get perp-walked on Channel 7 News while wearing the same grease-stained shirt he'd worn during 3 weeks of surveillance was comedy gold mixed with criminal stupidity. But instead of cutting her losses, Brenda doubled down like a gambler on her last chip. She hired Marcus Tank Sullivan and Billy Kowalski, 2 ex-cons whose idea of subtle investigation involved crowbars and bad decisions. The acrid smell of their cigarettes drifted from their rusted pickup truck as they conducted surveillance that looked more like casing a house for burglary. These weren't investigators, they were thugs with business cards. The mailbox destruction came first. I returned from a drug bust to find twisted metal scattered across my driveway like bomb fragments, my address numbers embedded in Mrs. Rodriguez's fence. The postal inspector who responded had the cold efficiency of someone who'd sent people to federal prison for lesser crimes. Tampering with mail delivery carries 3 years mandatory minimum, detective. Your neighbors are witnesses to a federal felony. But Tank and Billy were just getting started. The tire slashing happened during my nephew's birthday party. 4 sidewall punctures that hissed like angry snakes while kids played in the backyard. Nails scattered across my driveway in patterns that screamed deliberate sabotage, the metallic stench of destroyed rubber mixing with the sweet scent of birthday cake. Federal asset destruction while children were present. Even hardened prosecutors would find that personally offensive. The flooding incident proved Brenda had completely lost touch with reality. Came home to the sound of rushing water and found my garden hose severed, basement flooding with thousands of gallons that destroyed case files and electrical systems. The basement smelled like a swamp while water damage echoed through my house like a broken heartbeat. But the security cameras captured everything. Tank and Billy following Brenda's shouted instructions from the street, their faces clear as mugshots. Agent Chen arrived with a federal evidence team that treated my flooded basement like a terrorist crime scene. She's graduated from harassment to domestic terrorism, Chen announced, stepping around puddles while documenting destruction that would add decades to prison sentences. Your insurance claim just became Exhibit A in a federal conspiracy case. That's when my counterattack shifted into overdrive. While Brenda was busy destroying my property, I was quietly gathering the nuclear option she'd handed me. Every act of sabotage was captured on federal surveillance equipment. Every threatening communication was recorded on encrypted systems. Every intimidation attempt was documented by agents she didn't know existed. The anonymous flyer campaign backfired spectacularly. Someone distributed leaflets throughout the neighborhood claiming I was a corrupt cop running drug operations from my garage. The defamation was so poorly written that neighbors brought them to me laughing, especially Mrs. Patterson, who'd seen federal agents coming and going for weeks. "Honey, if you're a drug dealer, you're the worst-dressed one in history," she cackled, pointing to my discount store polo shirt. But Brenda's nuclear option was filing 6 simultaneous lawsuits against neighbors who'd supported me. Nuisance suits claiming property damage, harassment, defamation, legal warfare designed to drain bank accounts and force surrender through financial exhaustion. Frank Patterson's lawsuit claimed his American flag damaged property values. Sarah Mitchell got sued for hostile work vehicle display. Mrs. Chen faced charges for aggressive gardening practices. The courthouse filings arrived like artillery shells, each one representing thousands in legal costs that working families couldn't afford. I watched my neighbors' faces crumple as they calculated mortgage payments versus attorney fees, exactly what Brenda intended. Fear was her weapon, and she wielded it like a master. That's when Agent Chen dropped her own bombshell. Federal witness intimidation through abuse of legal process, she explained, reviewing the lawsuits with predatory satisfaction. Each filing is another RICO predicate act, and the pattern establishes criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. She paused, studying Brenda's legal strategy with professional admiration. She's building our case faster than we could have imagined. The community response was immediate and devastating to Brenda's plans. Local attorney David Martinez offered pro bono representation to all lawsuit victims, explaining that federal witness protection covered legal defense costs. "These suits will get dismissed with prejudice," he assured the group, "and she'll face sanctions for frivolous litigation." Meanwhile, the neighborhood transformed into something between a fortress and a family. Frank Patterson organized security patrols with military precision. Sarah Mitchell created communication networks that shared real-time updates. Mrs. Chen's destroyed rose garden became a memorial site where neighbors left flowers and notes of solidarity. The taste of approaching victory filled my mouth like fine wine as I reviewed the evidence that night. Brenda thought escalating pressure would force surrender and exile. Instead, she was providing documentation for federal charges that would destroy her completely, one perfectly recorded crime at a time. Brenda's final desperation play was so unhinged it made her previous schemes look rational. She called an emergency HOA meeting to strip my voting rights entirely, claiming I posed an imminent terrorist threat to community safety. The community center reeked of her anxiety perfume mixed with the burnt coffee that had witnessed months of her increasingly frantic performances. Her hands shook as she shuffled papers, clearly aware that her empire was collapsing around her designer golf outfit. The hired security guards were pure theater. 2 bored ex-mall cops from Apex Security who parked outside my house like I was under federal surveillance. Which, ironically, I was. Except the real federal agents were documenting everything from 3 different angles while these minimum-wage warriors chain-smoked and played mobile games. The smell of their cheap cigarettes drifted through my windows as they wondered why they were watching some suburban dad organize his garage. Her nuclear option was filing a restraining order based on completely fabricated evidence that would make Hollywood screenwriters blush. She appeared in family court wearing her best victim costume, voice trembling with manufactured terror as she presented doctored security footage claiming I'd threatened her life. "He said he'd make me disappear," she lied under oath, dabbing her eyes with tissues that probably cost more than most people's lunch. The judge, clearly swayed by her Oscar-worthy performance, granted a temporary order that banned me from HOA meetings, my own neighborhood streets after dark, and any intimidating behavior, which apparently included existing while being a homeowner. Walking out of that courthouse with papers that turned me into a criminal in my own community tasted like swallowing rusty nails mixed with pure rage. But here's where Brenda made her fatal error. Agent Chen's response was immediate and devastating. Perjury during proceedings involving a federal agent carries mandatory minimums that'll put her in prison until she's collecting Social Security, she explained, reviewing the court transcript with predatory satisfaction. She just lied under oath about a federal law enforcement officer during an active corruption investigation. That's not just perjury. That's obstruction of justice with federal enhancements. The restraining order gave Brenda exactly what she'd craved: total control without opposition. She used my forced absence to ram through punitive measures targeting my property exclusively, special assessments for security improvements that coincidentally benefited her brother-in-law's companies, parking restrictions affecting only my address, and emergency landscaping requirements designed to bankrupt me into submission. My counterattack was the revelation she never saw coming. Federal surveillance equipment hidden in my Jeep had recorded every interaction we'd ever had: months of harassment, discriminatory statements, criminal conspiracy, and witness intimidation, preserved in crystal-clear audio that would play like a confession tape at trial. Her own words were building the case that would destroy her completely. The federal wiretap authorization arrived on a Wednesday morning that smelled like victory mixed with fresh justice. Judges don't grant surveillance warrants casually, but Brenda's escalating criminal behavior had given prosecutors a mountain of probable cause. Phone calls coordinating illegal activities, planning witness retaliation, discussing evidence destruction, all captured on federal equipment that made every conversation admissible evidence. Then came the moment that shifted everything from harassment to medical emergency. Mrs. Patterson, the 80-year-old Marine widow who'd become our neighborhood's unofficial grandmother, collapsed in her driveway after receiving Brenda's latest violation notice. $500 for displaying her late husband's memorial flag garden, the same garden she'd tended for 15 years as a tribute to their fallen son. The ambulance sirens cutting through our quiet suburban morning sounded like a battle cry that would finally expose Brenda's cruelty to the world. Stress-induced cardiac episode directly linked to systematic harassment, the ER doctor wrote, his medical opinion becoming federal evidence connecting Brenda's terrorism to life-threatening consequences. She'd literally scared an elderly veteran's widow into a heart attack over flowers. The neighborhood's response was immediate and fierce. Frank Patterson organized round-the-clock support for his sister-in-law. Sarah Mitchell coordinated meal deliveries that fed Mrs. Patterson's family for weeks. Flowers appeared on her doorstep like offerings to a fallen hero, transforming her driveway into a memorial that made Brenda's violations look even more monstrous. Agent Chen coordinated the final phase with surgical precision. Federal warrants signed, state charges coordinated, asset seizure teams positioned, media briefings scheduled, she announced, her voice carrying months of investigation reaching explosive culmination. We hit the entire network simultaneously before anyone can destroy evidence or flee jurisdiction. The wiretaps had captured Brenda's desperate attempts to coordinate cover-ups with city officials, destroy financial records, and plan retaliation against federal witnesses. Every panicked phone call was another federal charge. Every coordination attempt was additional conspiracy counts. Every threat was enhanced penalties that would keep her imprisoned until she qualified for Medicare. The taste of approaching justice filled my mouth like champagne as the final pieces aligned. Brenda thought she'd eliminated her biggest threat through perjury and legal manipulation. Instead, she'd created perfect conditions for federal prosecution while documenting every crime in detail. The emergency community meeting was Brenda's final performance, and she'd unknowingly set the stage for her own public execution. She'd invited Channel 7 News and the Herald Tribune to witness her exposing the dangerous criminal threatening our peaceful suburban paradise. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as residents clutched years' worth of violation notices like evidence in a war crimes trial. Brenda held court at the front table, her signature perfume creating a suffocating cloud around her designer outfit while she prepared a PowerPoint presentation that would have been hilarious if it wasn't built on perjured testimony. Tonight, we protect our community from the criminal element that threatens our children and property values, she announced to the cameras, completely unaware that federal agents were documenting her final performance. Agent Chen, Captain Rodriguez, and 2 U.S. Marshals entered through the back door just as Brenda clicked to her first slide. A doctored photo of my garage labeled "Suspected Criminal Headquarters." The temperature dropped 20 degrees as federal authority filled the room with the kind of presence that makes guilty people sweat through expensive fabric. Brenda's voice faltered when she noticed the badges, but her narcissism demanded she finish the show. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, pointing at more fabricated evidence, This man has been conducting illegal surveillance that endangers our families. The metallic taste of irony was so thick I could practically chew it. She was accusing a federal agent of surveillance crimes while federal agents recorded her perjury in crystal clear audio. I stood up, restraining order be damned, with federal credentials that made the room gasp like they'd witnessed resurrection. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Detective Marcus Donovan with the Regional Drug Task Force, and Mrs. Whitmore has been interfering with a federal corruption investigation for 6 months. The silence was so complete you could hear her manicured world shattering into expensive pieces. Agent Chen stepped forward with authority that could silence Supreme Court justices. Brenda Whitmore, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, theft of federal property, money laundering, perjury, and obstruction of justice. The handcuffs clicking around Brenda's wrists echoed through the community center like the sound of justice finally showing up to the party uninvited. "This is entrapment," Brenda shrieked, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like a sandcastle in a hurricane. "He illegally surveilled law-abiding citizens." Her voice cracked with desperation as she realized every harassment campaign, every illegal towing, every violation notice had been documented by someone with federal authority and absolutely zero sense of humor about corruption. Federal prosecutor James Martinez addressed the stunned crowd with evidence that dropped jaws like anvils. The Whitmore family network embezzled over $400,000 from your HOA funds while operating a money laundering scheme through city contracts. Your harassment complaints provided probable cause for a RICO investigation that will recover every stolen penny with federal interest. The media feeding frenzy was everything Agent Chen had orchestrated. Channel 7's cameras captured Brenda's perp walk in high definition, her designer golf outfit contrasting beautifully with federal handcuffs as reporters shouted questions she'd never answer as a free woman. The footage would go viral within hours, turning suburban HOA tyranny into a national cautionary tale. Frank Patterson rose during the chaos, his 70-year-old Marine voice cutting through the pandemonium like a drill sergeant addressing recruits. "Detective Donovan, on behalf of everyone this woman terrorized, thank you for proving that bullies eventually meet their match." The thunderous applause that followed could have registered on seismic equipment, months of suppressed fury finally finding worthy release. Sarah Mitchell sobbed as she hugged her children, explaining that the mean lady who'd threatened their home was going to prison where she belonged. Mrs. Chen clutched her rose garden photos like sacred relics, understanding that her harassment had helped build federal cases that would protect countless communities from similar tyrants. The HOA board members who'd enabled Brenda's reign sat in stunned silence as Agent Chen explained their potential criminal exposure. Anyone who knowingly participated in selective enforcement faces conspiracy charges. Anyone wanting to cooperate should contact prosecutors immediately. The stampede for legal representation began before she finished speaking, but my mic drop moment was worth waiting for. I addressed the cameras with 20 years of cop confidence and 6 months of personal satisfaction. "You didn't steal from a homeowner, Mrs. Whitmore. You stole federal law enforcement property and interfered with a corruption investigation. That Jeep you cut chains to steal? It belonged to the United States government, and we take that personally." The taste of complete victory filled my mouth like the world's finest whiskey as Brenda's criminal empire collapsed in real-time television. She'd spent months trying to eliminate a neighbor who threatened her suburban kingdom. Instead, she'd harassed a federal agent into building the case that would destroy everything she'd stolen, one perfectly documented felony at a time. Justice tasted sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie when Brenda stood in federal court 3 months later, trading her designer golf outfits for an orange jumpsuit that clashed magnificently with her former lifestyle. 4 years in federal prison plus full restitution. The judge's gavel echoing through the courtroom like a period at the end of a very long, very satisfying sentence. Her son's contracting empire crumbled faster than stale cookies, their business licenses revoked when city auditors uncovered the bidding fraud that had stolen millions from taxpayers. The $400,000 in recovered HOA funds transformed our neighborhood from Brenda's personal piggy bank into an actual community paradise. Professional management replaced her corrupt regime with transparent oversight that treated residents like valued customers instead of medieval serfs. The smell of fresh paint and new flowers replaced the stench of fear that had poisoned our streets for years, while democratic bylaws prevented future dictators from terrorizing homeowners with measuring tapes and manufactured violations. Frank Patterson's American flag now flies proudly over his expanded memorial garden, protected by new rules celebrating patriotic displays instead of criminalizing them. The morning breeze carries the scent of Mrs. Chen's prize-winning roses, tended by neighbors who understand their significance as symbols of resistance against institutional cruelty. Sarah Mitchell parks her work van in her own driveway while her children play outside, their laughter echoing through streets where silence once reigned under Brenda's oppressive surveillance. The scholarship fund became our neighborhood's crown jewel, born from Mrs. Patterson's heart attack recovery and determination to transform trauma into opportunity. $25,000 annually helps children whose families survived HOA harassment pursue education without financial burden. Sarah's daughter Emma was our first recipient, planning to study civil rights law with the fierce determination of someone who watched her mother nearly lose everything to suburban tyranny. "I want to fight bullies like Detective Mack did," she announced during the award ceremony, bringing tears to eyes that had seen too much injustice. My personal healing arrived through unexpected channels that still make me smile during morning coffee. Jennifer Hayes, the kindergarten teacher 2 streets over, had watched the federal circus with professional fascination and personal admiration for someone fighting corruption while maintaining hope. Our first coffee date turned into evening walks through the neighborhood she'd seen me defending, her laughter bringing joy to spaces that had echoed with conflict. When she moved in 6 months later, the house Brenda tried so hard to steal from me became the home I'd been searching for since my divorce. The Jeep sits peacefully in our driveway now, its federal surveillance equipment replaced with car seats and soccer gear that would have horrified Brenda's aesthetic sensibilities. Neighbors wave during morning commutes, children beg for rides to school, and teenagers ask to hear stories about the time their neighborhood made national news for all the right reasons. The chain that once protected it from theft now secures nothing more dangerous than a suburban father's weekend adventure vehicle. Captain Rodriguez's promotion to task force supervisor came with assignments training other officers in community-based corruption investigations, teaching them that the best undercover work sometimes happens in your own backyard. The federal commendation letter hangs beside photos of our annual Community Rights Day, where Agent Chen speaks about recognizing corruption while neighbors share barbecue and stories that remind everyone how far we've traveled from darkness into light. The HOA Accountability Act passed unanimously in our state legislature, requiring criminal background checks for board positions and standardized appeal processes that protect homeowners nationwide. Municipal investigators use our case in training seminars, showing how individual harassment can expose systemic corruption when pursued through proper channels with patience and documentation. Our annual celebration has become the region's biggest community rights festival, combining education about homeowner protections with live music, local food trucks, and testimonials that inspire other neighborhoods to fight back against institutional bullying. This year's attendance topped 2,000 people, proving that justice stories resonate far beyond their original communities. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA nightmare. Trust me, we've heard worse, and there are legal remedies available when you know where to look. Subscribe to Karen Stories for more David versus Goliath justice tales where federal resources meet suburban bullies and ordinary people discover extraordinary power through community solidarity. Ring that notification bell because you never know when you'll need these strategies. And remember that sometimes the best revenge is transforming harassment into hope for future generations.